Hello, my name is Liza Maria, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today on my podcast, I'm glad to have Herb Baker, which is the author of From Apollo to Artemis, former manager, and works at Operations Support Office at Johnson Space Center. Hello, Mr. Baker. How are you doing today? And welcome on my podcast.
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I love having the opportunity to talk about NASA.
That's great. So, to start this podcast, can you tell us more about yourself and your career working with NASA?
Well, yeah, so that could take a while, but I'll try to keep it short. So I grew up in the space community near what was the Manned Spacecraft Center when it opened in 1963, 64. It's now the Johnson Space Center. And I've moved away a few times. I worked at NASA headquarters for a while and at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, but I'm back now. I finished my career back at the Johnson Space Center, and so I live just a few miles from there now. But so anyway, growing up there, I went to junior high, middle school, whatever you call it now, with the kids of the Grissom, Cooper, Carpenter, Schirra, Borman, Lovell, all of the kids of the first two groups of astronauts, and so I was their friends all through junior high and high school, and still today, of course, and then I even covered some of that's another long story I won't go into, but I had a job with the TV networks covering when I was a teenager, covering Apollo 11, Apollo 12, Apollo 13, Apollo 15, and a couple of the Skylab missions. But this is before I was actually working for NASA. I went to University of Texas and then started working for NASA soon after that and worked there for 42 years. And so when I retired back in, that's been 8 years now, 2017, NASA had been my life. So I couldn't just leave. And so I joined the NASA Alumni League. And so now I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League, Johnson Space Center. And so we have our monthly meeting on site at the Johnson Space Center. And I also volunteer for Space Center Houston and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. So I'm still almost every day, whatever I'm doing, it has something to do with NASA or space, and I just love it. So that's why people kept telling me, you need to write a book. And they'd been telling me that for about 10 or 12 years, and I kept thinking, yeah, right. What do I know about writing a book? And who would want to read my book? And because there's plenty of books by astronauts and flight directors and such. But anyway, they convinced me to do it, and so it's been out about 3 months now, and I'm really, really happy that I was able to finish that.
That's really interesting. And can you talk more about your own book? Because as you mentioned, you're also an author.
Well, an author with one book. It's my first. I mean, I do also write. There's an online it's organization. It's called medium.com where the people just post articles. And so I write for that. I've posted, I don't know, 20 or 25 articles for that. But again, this is my first book. And it's, I can call myself an author, I guess, since I have a published book, but I did not write it to be some famous best-selling author or for the money or anything like that. Like I said, I wrote it because so many people were telling me I should, and actually I did enjoy it. It was a chance because I went back to those early, junior high, high school days, and then of course covered everything since then, and so it was a kind of a nice, fun opportunity to go back and kind of relive a lot of those events and conversations and things that happened over the last 50 plus years. So, yeah, again, I'm uh, uh, kind of surprised I finished it. It was funny when I started talking about it and then at some point I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna really have to do this because now I've told people that I will. And it took a while. I probably spent about a year writing, and then I spent another 6 or 8 months edit because I did all of the editing and proofreading and formatting and all of that myself too. So it took a while, but again, it was well worth it.
And where people can find your book, where is it published?
Well, as with most books these days, it's available on Amazon. And of course, the Amazon, I'm based in the US, of course, and so Amazon US, but it's also available on, I think, all of Amazon's international uh, sites too. Like, for example, you could order it. I'm sure it's through the German Amazon.de, I think, for initials for Deutschland, and a couple of others. And so it's available on Amazon and also on Barnes and Noble, which is probably the largest bookstore kind of thing in the U.S. Yeah, I think that's mainly where people w would be able to find it.
And I know you're also an actor, so how was your experience being an actor and what roles you got to play?
Oh yeah, you'd never believe it. Some NASA guy, and I didn't even act in high school. I don't know if they do this in other countries, but in U.S. high schools, when you graduate for the seniors, they typically have a senior play, they call it, where it's usually a musical, and because there are lots of parts and a chorus, and you can have 75, 100 people in it, and so we had my graduating high school class had a senior play, but I wasn't in it because I was the band president, so I was playing in the orchestra. And so it's interesting how I got started and all of that. But anyway, in fact, I got started involved in community theater because of my instrument. I played in the orchestra for Jesus Christ Superstar and then The Sound of Music. And in both of those shows, it was a little small theater. And we were just off stage. And so I'm sitting there playing my instrument, and some of the actors at times are just a couple of feet away from me, I'm just like almost on the stage. And after a while, I'm thinking to myself, you know, I could do that. And so I've never been afraid to try anything new, right? Again, I'd never done it. And so I auditioned for the next show and I was cast in the chorus. And so this was 1979. So I was young and single. I was, well, 27. And so I ended up doing about, I don't know, 14, 15 shows because I almost did them just back to back to back to back to back. It didn't matter whether it was Shakespeare or a comedy or a musical or a mystery. If there was a show going on, I auditioned because I never would have dreamed that I enjoyed being on stage, acting in front of a live audience so much. But boy, once you do it, you, at least for me, I didn't want to stop. But so now I'm getting older. I get married. I have kids. I moved away to NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And so I didn't have time for the auditions and the learning the lines and the rehearsals and the performances. So I stopped. I had to stop my acting for actually 34 years. It wasn't until 2018 when I was back in Houston. I had retired. My kids were grown and out of the house, and I thought, oh, hey, I can get back into theater again. And so the funny story about that is that I had never really played much of a leading role in any show. I was mostly in the chorus and, smaller roles. Uh, and again, it had been 34 years since I was on stage. But it was getting near Christmas time. And I don't know if you're familiar with the show Miracle on 34th Street. And Chris Kringle is basically Santa Claus. And it's just basically a story about him. And so they were doing that show. And I didn't plan to be in it. I didn't even go to the auditions. But a friend of mine who was a teenager when I first worked with her in theater back in the 80s is now, in 2018, she's on the board of directors for this local theater, which is just across the street from Johnson Space Center. And she calls me and says, "Hey, they had the auditions for Miracle on 34th Street, and they didn't have anyone that they wanted to give the Kris Kringle part to. You would be perfect for it. And I thought, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You know, I was going to kind of gradually get back into this, not play the leading role in my first show back after 34 years. And I remember being really, really n nervous about that, be playing the leading role in the show after having so much time off. And it took a while to kind of get used to things again. I had things you have to remember about acting on stage, like if you're facing the audience and you turn around, you try not to turn around so that your back is never towards the audience, and just little things like that. But anyway, I did it and I loved it. I had such a great time. I think it's probably the most enjoyable role I've ever played in theater. And it did a few more shows after that, but then the pandemic happened, and the theater actually shut down for a while, and then I started getting much more busy into the NASA stuff again, the Alumni League and volunteering and writing my book. And so it's been a couple of years now again since I actually was on the stage. But yeah, I might try it again though if things slow down a little bit eventually.
That's really nice. So, one of the questions here that people might really want to know, and I'm sure many listeners that really want to work at NASA or is one of their dreams. So, they probably want to know from you what's the best part of working at NASA in your opinion?
Well, so I would say it, it's interesting to try to answer that because that's really basically, other than jobs when I was growing up as a young teenager, that's the only place I've ever worked. So, I mean, obviously, I know lots of friends and family and other people who have worked at other places and other industries, and they tell me, and I hear and read stories, but not ever actually experiencing those myself. It's hard to compare, but boy, I can't imagine a better place to work than NASA. I mean, you're working with some of the just most dedicated, smartest, hardworking people. And you all, the cool thing about it for me was that you're all, working for something, you're all working together to achieve the mission, whatever it is, whether it's sending three astronauts to the moon, or seven people up in a space shuttle, or a couple of people to the space station. And it's bigger than yourself, right? I mean, nothing against some of the other jobs in the world, but it's just really cool to think that advancing humanity into space and all of these big, studying the solar system and living and working in space, all of these things that just are really cool to think about. And again, you know, I'm sure there are other lots of places to work where the people work together well and get along together and have fun, but not every place is like that. And I was one of those lucky people who got up in the morning and looked forward to going to work almost every day. I mean, there were hard days too, and it wasn't always easy, and there was some frustration and such, but still, I would be we're Johnson Space Center has our official visitor center is Space Center Houston, which is right next door. And the only way if you don't have a NASA badge, the only way you can get on to Johnson Space Center is through the visitor center, and you ride a tram, and so I would be walking from one building to the next while I was working there, and here comes a tram, with 100 people on it, and they're just looking around, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, they're paying me to come spend every day here, and those people paid good money just to get a look at where I get to come work every day. And so, and so people from all over the world come to see Space Center Houston and the Johnson Space Center. So anyway, it's just and again, boy, every day was interesting and exciting and challenging. I remember, again, I said 42 years there, and I thought, once I started getting close to retirement, things might slow down a little bit and I could take it easy, but no, 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 no. I was doing just as much cool, interesting, hard stuff at the very end as I did from the very beginning. So anyway, I loved it, every bit of it.
So, what inspired you to work for NASA or be a space fan in the first place?
Well, it's obviously having grown up with the space program and being some of my good friends, their fathers were because it was all men back then, were astronauts and we're going to the moon and I mean I'm still of course Gus Grissom died in the Apollo 1 fire, but I'm still good friends with his two sons, Mark and Scott, 60 years later. And so, it was definitely, something I was aware of and thought was really cool. Um, but believe it or not, and I did mention this, most people probably assume, well, if you worked for NASA for 40 something years, you were, an astronaut or engineer or scientist or doctor or something like that. And I was none of those. I was a business guy. Most people don't realize that NASA spends 80 to 90% of its budget on contracts with Grumman and SpaceX and Lockheed and Boeing and so they need people to award and manage and administer those contracts. And so that's what I did. And so when I went to school at University of Texas, I was not planning to have a career in NASA because back then, even having grown up in the community, I assumed that you had to be an engineer or scientist to work there. And again, it's a long story for a separate day, how I got my job. But they actually, I took a test and did so well on the test that's how you got a job with the government back in the 70s was you took what they called a civil service exam. And I did so well on the test that they called me and said, "Hey, would you like to come interview for a job in our business office?" And I thought, "You have a business office?" I said, "Yeah, can I be there, tomorrow?" And so anyway, yeah, make a long story short, I went down and the last funny thing about that is the guy who interviewed me was, no surprise, the father of one of my friends in high school. And so I don't know if that helped or not, but it certainly didn't hurt. And so yeah, so 42 years later, here I am. And so I don't know about being inspired. It's just kind of the way, my life happened. Although my my mother, for most people, at least back in the early days, it was their fathers who worked for NASA. But my mother actually played a role in saving Skylab in 1973, and that was just a couple of years before I started at NASA. So I guess you can also say that, yeah, wow, my mother played a role there, and so yeah, if if it ever happens that I have an opportunity, I will certainly, be interested in working there too.
That's such a beautiful story. And as a last question on the podcast is, what would be your advice for someone young that wants to work with space?
Well, so I do get asked that a lot, and I would say, however, the words come out. It's go for it. Don't be afraid. Don't. Uh, you might think, oh gosh, they're not going to want me, or I could never qualify for that job. And I even have I'll tell a quick story. Uh, there's uh, was a guy. Charlie Bolden, who uh, who eventually became who was an astronaut and became the administrator of NASA. And this was back he was still like in the naval flight school or something like that. And an astronaut came to visit him and asked him because there was an announcement out for new astronauts and said, "Charlie, are you going to apply for the astronaut tour?" And Charlie said, "No, why would I do that? They'll never pick me." And the guy said to Charlie, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You get over there and fill out the form and apply." And so he did. And like I said, he was selected He became an astronaut and flew in space several times, and then he became the leader of NASA. So that's, the perfect example. Here he was not even going to apply because he thought, well, there's no chance they'll pick me, and he ended up leading the agency. So that's kind of a long way of saying, yeah, if you want to do it, then go for it. Don't let fear stop you from, from possibly being unsuccessful. Um, there's another famous phrase, what failure is not an option, right? From Apollo 13. Well, that's fine if you're trying to save the lives of three astronauts, coming home in a damaged spaceship, but just in everyday life, yeah, failure is a requirement. You're not trying hard enough if you're not failing every once in a while. And so, anyway, that's sorry for that long answer, but that kind of covers everything I like to tell people about possibly working for NASA someday.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here today, and it was a pleasure talking to you and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me, and I'd be happy to come back sometime if you'd like me to do that.
Thank you.